Thanks. Is the microphone connected to that? Is that, oh, okay. Then I was like, I don't need a microphone. We're all friends here, right? We were just talking about superpower. And I think my superpower was getting into that Club Bergheim. My girlfriend and I got to town at 10 p.m. We went and had a sausage at 10:30 p.m., got in line, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm up at the front. I'm getting near, and I'm watching people get turned away. And I'm thinking, shit, man, if I get turned away, this is really bad. Like, what if they let her in and not me? And how's that going to work? And so I'm trying to imagine, what face should I have on so that this super tough guy, bouncer guy, doesn't wave me off? And it's some mixture of I don't give a shit if I get in. It's been 2.5 hours, whatever. And like confidence. So it was sort of like a. And then we walked up and they did not say no. And then we went in, and it was nuts. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And then we were there till 4 a.m, and then we had a bad breakfast, and then I slept until 4 p.m. So I've been enjoying Berlin. I haven't been here for, 15 years, and it's just amazing to be back. And I'm really excited to be amongst not just the family, but like the bigger family, which is kind of what this organization is serving, which is those of us who are deciding on a different path. You know, if you choose to start a company, you're choosing not to work at some job that you don't love for some big corporation under bad lighting. You're not grinding. And if you're working for a startup, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. This whole like the founder thing, I don't think makes any sense at all. The truth is, it's about whether you have a founder's love for what you're doing. And so in my experience, I've had people that work for me in accounting that have a founder's love and passion for what they're doing. And so to me, to be around people that choose this as a life, it's hard, you know. Odds of success in startups are low. But the odds of having an amazing life where you have an unreasonable love for the work that you do is very high. Much higher than you're going to find if you work for any like big, giant corporation, Symantec or, whatever. I don't know who's torturing young people's minds under fluorescent lights in Berlin, but shouldn't pick on them. They're the antivirus people. They're fine. So, thank you for having me. And I don't do slides. I'm just going to kind of share some brain drops. So I'm thinking I'll give you guys like a few minutes on me and how I got here, and then some stories about Zynga and what I've learned along the way. And then you can ask me anything you want, and don't be shy about it. I'm really excited to have some Zynga peeps in the house too. So that's really awesome. When I got out of college, I started my career in television and film. I made documentaries for the History Channel and A&E, and I blew up cars in really bad movies. And I did special effects on a movie called Beastmaster 3 that somehow the Academy did not recognize our efforts. I think it had a lot going for it, but, maybe one day, Wikipedia, things happen. It could take off. I moved over to the internet in 1999. I got to the party just in time for like the cops to show up and like kick everyone out. I took a pay cut, a 40% pay cut, and moved to a place that cost 30% more when I left LA for Silicon Valley. I had never worked in technology before, but I had run a company. And there was such a shortage of people with ops experience back then that I was able to get a job at a startup called emusic.com. So going back, in the Wayback Machine, this is before Napster. This is when MP3 players were like the size of my shoe and held 50 songs. And we didn't have all of the content in the world. We had what we were able to license. So we had like bongo drums from Brazil, and like we didn't have a lot of great content. And no one knew what an MP3 was at this point. So we went public. And I went in as a director. We went public. I had to fire my boss. I had to fire hundreds of people. And what ended up happening was, as our stock plummeted from $20 a share on the way down to eventually settling in at a nice 53 cents. As that started happening, we had layoffs, executives left, and all I did was I just put myself in the path of lightning. So imagine this is 99, I'm much younger, much better head of hair version of me, and I've got this job, first time tech company, and the head of human resources, she just gets a better job and quits. The CEO is like, trying to figure it out. I'm a director, and I just walk into his office and I say, hey, Gene, Marcus. He's like, oh, yeah, how's it going? I go, yeah, listen, in my last job where I was a executive, I actually ran human resources, which wasn't really true per se. No one ran human resources at the company, but because we were small. But I said, hey, I can cover this function for you until we bring somebody else on. And he's like, oh, thank you, great. I became a VP of operations that day. It was that simple. And whenever anyone quit, or whenever anything fell on the floor, or whenever anything needed getting done, I just did it. I didn't care. I didn't have ego about it. I didn't care how late I had to work. All I cared about was learning as much as I could and just being there for this company. Now, the opposite of a meteoric rise would be a devastating crash. As our devastating crash was happening, basically, no one knew what an MP3 player was, or MP3 was. People would say, hey, where's my CD, when they would order music from us. And we'd say, no, the music's already in your computer. You can just burn the CD. Well, where's the music? Well, it's in your music folder. I don't have a music folder. Yes, you do. You have a folder. It's called My Music, and here's where it is. And they'd say, who the hell do you think you are putting a folder on my computer? We didn't do it. Microsoft did it. You just didn't know that the music was there. And it was this whole thing. Then Napster came out, and everyone knew what an MP3 was, but no one wanted to pay for them. So now we're selling lemonade, and Napster's giving away beer, and we're public. And so that's why the thing tanked. In the end, we got acquired by Universal Music. They moved the company down to San Diego, and I made more money from my severance package than I did from my stock, because I never sold a share, because if you sell a share, then all the employees panic, like, oh, executives are. So that was eMusic. Then I was a founder of a billing infrastructure company called Vindicia. Names do matter. People say names of company doesn't matter. If you name your company something that sounds like a drug for an open sore, then no one will want to buy you or sign up. But I did that for about 4.5 years. And after the dot-com one bust, a lot of people left town, right? But those of us who stayed in the valley, we all knew each other, and we all helped each other out. We looked out for each other. And so I became like the ops guy. And so all these people would come to me with their startups and say, oh, Marcus, can you take a look at this lease we have for the real estate? I'm like, yeah, sure, man. I'll look over your lease or this employment agreement. And I just started helping people out. And they would give me advisor shares. And if you took all the money I made from advisor shares from helping people out for like a decade, I could buy like a used Mini Cooper. Not even like a 2014, like a 2006. I mean, it was not for money. It was for love and for wanting to help people out. The exception would be Zynga. So Mark Pincus and I knew each other, we were friends, and he wanted to figure out how to start charging money in games, right? And my startup was this billing infrastructure security thing, so, I was the guy. And I started going over there, and I ended up basically having 2 jobs. Normally when you're an advisor, you get some shares and you spend as little time as possible there because you get the same number of shares. But I started working there 2 or 3 hours a day at night after my job. And I was so addicted to the environment that it became clear that I was going to have to leave the startup where I was a founder. And I ended up joining Zynga and in the first couple dozen employees. And then I was initially responsible for everything that wasn't games. So human resources, customer service, QA, network operations, stats, a whole bunch of stuff I had no business or experience doing before. And then, and we were just talking about this before, so then we had some games, like, you know, you guys all remember Mafia Wars? And maybe you might even remember Vampire Wars? Anyone? Dope Wars? Football Wars, Space Wars, Special Forces Wars, Car Wars, Fashion Wars? Yeah. There was even Prison Wars, where the fantasy was that you're in a prison gang and you're fighting to be in a stronger prison gang. I mean, we made some bad games. And no one knew what to do with these bad games, but they were making more money than my startup that I had left. And so I said to Mark Pincus, hey man, let me run this big box of misfit toys. I want it. Just give me 5 or 6 guys, and I want to flatten it out, and I'm going to learn games. And he said, sure, go ahead. Like, what do you have to lose, right? So I kind of built this like ragtag team. We took these games and we actually turned them around and started making some decent money with them. Then that team broke off and went and built FishVille. Not a great game, but it's okay, man. It's all right. It's not your fault. It's not you. Okay, because it was the first Studio I game. I get it. So this game, the quality matters. When you visit somebody in a game, in a fish tank game, and the action is I'm scrubbing the crap off the side of their tank, that is not a good game. And I said to the guys, I'm like, guys, why can't I feed the fish? And they looked at me and they said, the fish will just explode. You'll overfeed them. Like, it's a game. Like, it's a game. Why can't they just swim around? Like, why do they have to die? Maybe there's no effect when friends feed. And they're like, no, man, you're going to break the whole economy. It'll be a disaster. So FishVille, then we ended up sending that to Studio I, this office in India, which is now Zynga's biggest game studio. But at the time, we just gave them, India was where games went to die. Enter the Sandman. He used to put games to sleep. So basically, Mark let me do the same thing that my previous CEO, Gene, let me do, which is when something needed done, I just put myself in the path of lightning. I said, give it to me, and then I went for it. And I totally screwed stuff up, right? But when you're screwing up stuff that people don't really care that much about, it's a good way to learn. So then I had that success, and then they said, hey, we want you to be the COO of the game studios worldwide. So I went from being like the guy running these like weird assortment of games to being the company's COO of the game studios worldwide. And this was during the like FarmVille, CityVille, like big boom times where everything we did worked, you know? And so that's what I did for a couple of years. And then we brought in executives, and then I'm like, oh, you know what? I thought I had so much money on paper. The stock, I mean, it was insane. But I'm like, oh, the last thing for me to do is build games from scratch. I've taken over other people's games. I want to build something from the beginning and really be creative. I was not very good at this. And as the stock started to take a dive, they moved me back into an operations role. And that's kind of what I did. Then Mark Pincus left. They brought in this guy from Microsoft. I stuck around for about 3 months of that. Then I bailed out of there, hung out with this guy in Ireland for a couple months, traveled. Then Mark Pincus went back to Zynga. He asked me if I would go back. I said, I'll go back for 1 more year. And then I had the hardest year of work I've ever had in my life that ended in May of last year. So I went back in, and I had to cut $100 million in OpEx out of the company. Like, this is big, grown-up executive stuff. And it was really not as much fun as building startups. And so I had to, say goodbye to 368 people. I had to go through every contract with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, I had an amazing team, and that's what we did. And we did the work that tightened the belt that's giving the company room to breathe right now and grow. And at the end of it, I realized at the end of that year, and we hired another CEO. And at the end of the year, I thought, okay, I've now checked off that box. Like, I have now been the COO, public company at scale, $750 million a year in revenue. What do I want to do now? And I realized that all I want to do now is help startups. So I went traveling. I got the call from YC, come be part-time at YC. So I've advised a lot of companies through YC. I've raised a little fund. I do a little investing. And I'm working on a little game project, not a video game. It's a card game, and it's like Cards Against Humanity. It's dirty. It's not appropriate for the family audience. And so I'm just like kind of figuring out my life. And so that's kind of the life story, okay? Going into the Zynga, like reality of Zynga. When I joined this thing, people thought I was insane. Like, you're gonna make games on the Facebook, okay? No one thought it was gonna be a big thing. We had this game at the time, and our games were really low quality in the beginning. They looked like something that might have been on like a digital watch you got for your 13th birthday, you know, like that you would sneak into class. They were really weak. But we had this one game, it was a word game, and it was like Boggle. Like you'd basically look for words. And I would play with my friend Jackie, and she said, Marcus, you know, you're beating me at the same rate that my mother beats me at. I would love to see you and my mother play. And so that's why in 2008 I became friends with a 74-year-old woman on Facebook who I had never met before. And we played this game all the time. And we became friends. I mean, we had never met in person, but you know, after the weekend, she'd say, hey, how was your weekend? It was great. How was yours? Oh, the garden. She'd say, you know, did you go on any dates? Yes, I did. How'd it go? Not so great. You know, Jackie's single. I go, yeah, I know. Jackie's single. Thank you. And we had this whole thing, and it was like part of my life. And then one day she didn't log in. And back then, you know, you couldn't chat in the game. There's other windows and stuff. Another day goes by. I don't hear from her. I'm reaching out. What's going on? Finally, I called Jackie, and she said, and she's in tears, and her mother had a stroke, and Roberta died like 2 weeks later. And I wept, like I lost my friend. And that's when I knew that I needed to quit my startup. And that's when I knew that this wasn't going to be an advisor gig. And I knew that the world was ready for people to be united in play. You know, how many of you have kids? Yeah, I don't have any kids. But I know that my parents used to play with me. And people love playing with their kids. And then their kids get older, and then they don't get to do that anymore. And they have to be like a heavy. They have to be the rules people or whatever. And then you just hope that some point later in your relationship you get back to play. Or you get to have grandchildren and play with them. Right? And so what our mission was to connect the world in games. You know? So that people would forever play games with their grandparents, that play would become a little 5-minute part of your life. Our games were not the highest quality games. Our games were the most social games. The games where you could give people things, collaborate on things, create together and grow things together. That's what it was about. So, going back to 2008, we're not the number one app company on Facebook. There's still Slide because Facebook hasn't had photos yet. There's all sorts of stuff happening. But we focus on being the most social, and we make the gates as low as possible. So in video games, the gate is the point where you make it so that someone's going to have to either put in some money or go away and come back the next day. Okay? Zynga games were very similar to competitors. Like, we didn't make the first Mafia themed game. We didn't make the first, we weren't first. We were faster and more social and had lower gates. So, you know, Farmtown came out. I think they shot up to 5 million DAU. Zynga released FarmVille, which had different art. Started off very similar game, slightly different art. The Farmtown team released new content once every 10 days. We released new content 4 or 5 times per week. We released more content more quickly than anybody in the game industry had ever seen. And the reason why we did that is because we had no idea what we were doing. Honestly. In the beginning, real game industry people would not come near us. They were like, social games, no. I mean, I remember 2008 GDC, They wouldn't give us a booth. I couldn't pay for a booth for recruiting people. So we just threw like a sick party across the street. By 2009, we had a big booth. By 2010, we had all the keynotes. Like, the idea of playing with people with your friends and meeting new friends is so compelling, it couldn't be ignored, you know? And that's basically kind of what happened. In the beginning, we just released more content than anybody else. We made the games so you could play longer than anyone else. We put them out in more languages than anybody had ever done before, 26 languages for some of the games. And we sim shipped in all those languages. So basically, there was no lag, right? We created FOMO in the games, which we've seen like with Snapchat. FOMO, you guys know FOMO? So FOMO is real, you know? We had Lady Gaga cows, and I had a very upset VIP customer who said, damn it, I was visiting my grandchildren. I need that last Gaga cow to complete my set. I'm like, well, I couldn't believe it. And like, we created that. So when you make that much content all the time, people have to log in every day or they'll miss something. We had so many tests running. We were collecting so much data all the time. We didn't have a clean set of users that weren't part of a test. Everyone was part of some, like 5 tests. We tested and measured everything that we could. And we succeeded. Now you could say we succeeded because we released all that content all the time, because we measured everything, and we took out things that weren't performing well. Could be that. Could be right place, right time. Could be all of those things. But what we sought out to do and continue to do is to create games that people play with their loved ones, that they sink real time into. The company, if you look at its history, people often ask, like, hey, what do you think happened? Which I spent a lot of time on. And it's like a bizarre kind of therapy. Like, oh, I had so much more money on paper before. What happened? You know, if I had to guess, I would say, okay, you know, we did Mafia Wars, Vampire Wars, Pirate Wars, Dope Wars, this. We did FarmVille, Cafe World, which is basically Cafeville, Frontierville, Fishville, Pioneerville, Treasure Islandville, like PetVille, you know. And so I don't think that we did the best job of getting ahead of what audiences would want. We thought, you know, CityVille was over 25 million daily active users in a game, and we're like, whoa. We wondered if a game could ever be bigger. And then now we see the potential for something, what it can do. You know, you see the potential with Clash of Clans, $1 billion a year game. You see the potential with Pokemon and AR. And you go, wow, you know, games are a great business to be in. Games are also a really hard business to be in. In terms of kind of lessons I can brain drops give you guys on the startup stuff, you know, really just allow yourself to love it the whole time with your whole heart and get everything you can from the experience. You know, with startups, you're not going to necessarily get the same level of mentorship that you would get at some big company, but startups are where they'll let you do stuff that you would never get to do at a big company. Like, you'd have to wait for years to get to do stuff. We had people who were a couple years out of business school running $100 million a year P&Ls. You know, that's what you get if you go for the startup life. The other thing I could tell you, how many of you are founders teams of less than 10? Okay, so some of the early people aren't going to make it. They're not going to be with you forever. It would be nice if they were, but maybe they're not. So just, sorry. A lot of startups bite the dust because they don't deal with the reality of that soon enough, okay? There should never be an aristocracy of founders or early employees. It doesn't matter if you're early. We all contribute all the time. That should be a part of your culture. That should be in the DNA. And you should have the kind of relationship with your employees and your co-founders where you can call each other out on it. And look, if you manage a group of 10 people, at any given time, 2 or 3 of them are going through like a breakup, a flu, a move. I mean, I once had a team productivity just got crushed by someone going on a juice cleanse. One person goes on a juice cleanse, and everyone's like, oh my God, how do you feel? I feel amazing. I lost 4 pounds by not eating. And then everyone else is clanging around with the bottles, and then everyone gets sick and they're cranky. I mean, anything can take out a team, but you have to have the kind of feedback loop and deliverables where you can call it out and go, hey, productivity's off here, guys. What's happened? In terms of deciding what to do when you're a startup. So when you're managing a team, your engineering hours are, and I'm not an engineer, you wouldn't want me to write a line of code. Your engineering hours are the most precious resources that you have, okay? So everything that you build should be built for a reason, for a desired outcome. So at Zynga, we would do these product roadmaps, and we would say, okay, here are the features, here's how many engineering hours approximately, or engineering person days, it will take. And if you don't know what that is in the beginning, you can just do a t-shirt, small, medium, large, extra large. And here is the metric that we're going to move by releasing this, right? And then you look back, you basically once a week review actuals. And then you make decisions about the future roadmap. You go, wow, you know what? That treasure chest feature, that really killed it. Well, what do we have do we think we should build this other feature, or should we go deeper with treasure chest, right? You have to have that discipline. You cannot throw away engineering person hours. You cannot. So everything gets built for a reason, for a desired outcome. And you're going to be terrible at it at first. Remember how terrible some early PMs were? They'd be like, oh my God, we're going to move this by 4%. And it's like, not even 4 basis points. Sorry, boop, boop, boo. But you learn. And until you start measuring, you can't grow your abilities. And same thing, swags of engineering time. You'll get better. Your team will get better at communicating with each other. The engineer will learn to ask follow-up questions. The product designer will learn to write a more thorough spec. So I guess that's be honest with your founders. No aristocracy of founders or early employees. Everyone contributes. Don't waste engineering person hours. Everything needs to be built to move a metric or for an outcome that can be measured later. What else? Capital. I'm really excited about the big, Brian was just telling me about how many more VCs there are now in Berlin than there were even 5 years ago. And that's really great. But that doesn't mean that all money is great money. Some money is better than other money. So I can tell you, on one of my trips where I was speaking to startups, I went to Stockholm. Have you guys ever been to that Vasa Museum? Stockholm? How many of you guys have seen it? All of you should go see this museum. Because basically, back in the 16th century, if you were an entrepreneur, you were a pirate. You didn't want to work in a bakery or be an apprentice or something. You were like a pirate. And the way it worked back then was you would basically get some idea of where you could go raid or where there's treasure, and you would raise a little scratch from friends and family, and you'd hire a boat builder. And that was your CTO. And then you would go to the king, and you would say, hey, king, I need some money for my big venture. And he'd say, who the hell are you? And you'd say, I'm Sven. I'm sorry if I'm abusing Nordic names. I'm Sven. And he's like, oh, have you ever been the captain before? And you're like, no, but I was the second mate on this other thing. And you know what? It's going to be great. I have this map. And he's like, well, who's your shipbuilder? And you're like, oh, my shipbuilder is Bjorn. And he, built the ship for this other one where you made a ton of money. And well, that's good enough for me. And the guy, spins his mustache and gets his big feather pen. And he says, okay, I'll fund you. This is a true story. You don't believe? You're shaking your head. This is a true. Go to see the museum. They know everything that happened. So the king says, I will fund your mission on two conditions. And the guy says, well, what? And he says, okay, first thing, you got to fly my flag. Country flag and my personal coat of arms. Yeah, no problem. Of course, king. I would have done that anyway. Sure. He says, and the ship must have 2 rows of guns. I want a ship with 2 rows of guns. Sure, we might have to increase I don't care. Do it. Great. He signs it. Off we go. Now, the captain, our young captain, starts recruiting. He's got, and the average age back then of one of the people on the boat was 20 to 25. and they all worked in really tight spaces and ate crappy food. Sound familiar? It's like startups, right? It's a startup. And so he goes back and he tells Bjorn, like, good news, buddy, we're funded. And yay, and everyone's excited. And he says, but we got to have 2 rows of guns. CTO says, no, it's impossible. We've already built the whole base of the boat. There's no way we'll launch it in time for the currents. Like, we can't do it. And our captain says, you're going to have to do it because if we go back to the king, you can't go back to you can't tell the king no guns. Figure it out. And then they're getting the crew together. They get a navigator who's kind of like the marketing person, you know. And they're building this crew together, and they're getting ready for the launch, and everyone's excited about seeing the ship with 2 rows of guns. And the navigator says, hey, Captain, I think we got a problem. He says, well, what is it? He says, watch this. And he has a bunch of the scallywag, the crew, run across the horizontal axis of the boat, and the whole boat goes like this. And the captain says, what? He says, it's not supposed to do that, man. He says, it'll be fine once we launch. We just need more water around the boat, and then it'll be more stable. And then we're getting ready for launch, and everyone wants to see the launch of the boat with 2 rows of guns. And so the captain says, hey, everybody, here's the thing. When we launch this thing, we're just going to do a loop around the bay. It's not the real launch. The king's coming down. They're going to have a band. You know what? Bring your wives and kids on the boat because we're just going to do a loop around the bay, and it'll be fine. Yay, Captain, you're the best. So they load the whole boat out, and they start to go, and they're about a mile from the shore. And the captain says, what's the point of having 2 rows of guns if we don't fire them? And so they open up the little doors. Now there's twice as many little doors and twice as much weight. They push the guns out, and they fire all of the guns on the aft side. I don't know. One of the sides, after port. One of the sides, they fire all of them at once. And the boat goes boop, like this, and it fills up with water, and it sinks a mile from the shore. Almost everybody dies. Only the strongest swimmers who could survive the coldest water made it back. And you know, they blamed Bjorn. They blamed the CTO for the whole thing when he said, like, don't do it. The king didn't catch any grief. I guess, like, the moral of the story is, like, if you have a good investor, then the good investor will not tell you what to do with your product. The good investor will engage with you and help you find your way. You know, we were talking about Techstars before, and one of the founders of Techstars is this guy named Brad Feld. And Brad was on Zynga's board in the beginning, and I used to call him up. I didn't care what day it was. I didn't really care very much about what time it was. And I would say to him, hey, man, I really don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like, I've got this data center, and I can't, the machines, and I got, you know, my credit card's got $100,000 in server costs on it, and he was just like, all right, calm down, take it easy, let's walk through this. And we would just talk through problems. I never worried that he was judging me. I never worried that it would affect our next round of funding. I never worried about anything because I had an ally in my investor. I had an ally in my board member. That's who you want. It doesn't matter what firm the person's with because the money is the same. Okay? So that was a long way of saying get smart money. I'm trying to think what else I got for you guys. Got any questions?
How important is loyalty to your co-founders, conspirators, and shareholders and the people you work with and trust?
I mean, I don't want to work with anybody that's a dirtbag. Like and you don't need to be. You know, if you and your founders do have to have a breakup, then honor the work that they've done. You know, you don't need to crush them, you know. There's no reason for that. Like if the thing takes off and they make money, great. I mean, I met with a startup last week where the founder wasn't, the CEO and founder was not the right person to scale the company. And he knew it, and he kind of was beating his head against the wall. And eventually the board he's still on the board, but he's not in the day-to-day operations of the company. And there was a lot of drama, and there were people who were really loyal to that person, and there was a lot of things. And they asked me kind of what I thought they should do. And I said, I think you should take 2 or 3 of the smartest things that guy ever said and have someone come with stencils and write them on the walls, quotes. And you put that guy's name down and you put comma, founder, founding CEO, comma, board member. And then when he comes in here, he can be filled with pride and that the thing is living on with his DNA in it. The old timers will appreciate that you're not disregarding the hard work of this person. He'll end up being a better board member. That's the kind of stuff you can do. Just be a human being, you know? I mean, it's crazy. Like what happens in the beginning of a startup is like everyone you hire is like a Swiss Army knife, you know? And a Swiss Army knife can do a lot of things. Like you can open a beer bottle, you can kind of like tweeze the eyebrows, you could cut something, but you're not going to want to eat dinner with that thing every day for the rest of your life. You know, or if you needed to do like open heart surgery, you'd sure want someone that's a scalpel. You know, and at some point, Swiss Army knife people tend to have to become a scalpel. And that can be really hard. And some people have a tough time with that transition. Some people are professional Swiss Army knives who just go from startup to startup. And so being able to have an honest conversation about it, like, hey man, you know, I can't give you this broad of a reach anymore. I need you to focus on these things. And so there's these kind of types of people. I mean, some of the best engineers we had at Zynga were only good in a crisis. And when you just put them on a regular team, they were just phoning it in, just hating it. But then something would go wrong. And you'd be like, oh man. There was this one guy named Dutch. I mean, it was amazing. Like, Dutch, this whole thing is on fire. No one knows what to do. Can you go and work on it? He'd be like, oh yeah. And then that would be it. He'd stay up for 3 days straight, solve the problem. He's a hero. And then he might be, you know, not really have anything that excites him for another month or 2. You know? And so it's like you didn't want bad things to happen, but when they did, you had people that loved the thrill of that. You know? And there's like engineers that love that. How many of you are engineers? You're an engineer, man. We just talked about it. You. Both of you can code.
I'm a developer.
Okay.
Engineer, I see more the technical kind of side.
Okay. That's fair.
That's why I
Well, I'll say that so these terms are kind of bandied about. So we have like developers who are also engineers, and there's, you know, in my mind, if you are hiring engineers or developers, the litmus test is to try and figure out how they have progressed their skills over the years. So like if somebody is an engineer and they've been doing it for 5 years, ask them which languages they're highly proficient in. Because if it's just one, then that ain't so good. You know, you want someone who's continually learning, who's developing their skills. So loyalty question, is there another question?
How do you know when someone who started at your startup right from day one is no longer the right person for the job? They're still the same person they used to be, but the company's outgrown them. How do you identify that?
I mean, I think you probably have already identified that. Like, I mean, if you're asking me, you know. And so what ends up happening is sometimes it's just about adjusting the role and finding the right role for them to be in. The tough thing is also as you grow, this thing happens. Like in Zynga in the early days, we used to have this weekly e-staff meeting. Basically like all of the, well, first it was the whole company. We'd all get together and have a meeting once a week and just talk. Then as we got too big, that wasn't really efficient anymore. Then it became a subset. Then it was just the managers. And the managers would have to go back out and be like, hey, here's what happened in the meeting. Here's what Mark said. Here's what Marcus said. And the early employees, they just don't love that, you know, and that's an adjustment. And then you get even bigger. And then those managers start not getting invited. And then there's another tier. And it's just this thing that's really hard. And you have to really over-communicate. And, you know, having a frank conversation where you're saying, hey, this current project, you know, how into this are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And all of us are going to have some projects where they're not super into it, but we shouldn't be on them forever. The other thing, too, is it's really important in your company to have recognition systems. So before we talked about, like, if you have 10 people, there's a couple of people that are going through some stuff. If you use Scrum or Agile or Basecamp or whatever you're using, you can kind of tell who's hitting their stride and who's not, right? You also need to more proactively understand who your athletes are. So there are some people that are consistent and they deliver great work. And then there's some people that are 5 or 10x in output, right? If they're on something that they're into. There's some people that are great teachers. There's some people that you can give them somebody to work under them who's new, and they can grow that person into someone amazing, you know? At Zynga, we used to regularly look at talent mapping, and we would look at, say, okay, let's look at where the most talented engineers in the company are working, the most talented PMs. And then we would move people. We would say, whoa, another PM on CityVille might be worth another $300,000 a day. Let's move someone from PetVille to CityVille. And here's how it would work. We would say, okay, Jeff, listen, we need you on CityVille. We have this great opportunity for you. Who in the org is ready to step up that you've been working with? Okay, for the next 3 weeks, you're 50% on PetVille and 50% on CityVille until you have, until Rachel's ready to take over. And then we want you 20% next month and then off completely. You make sure Rachel kills it. And then Rachel was like, yay, I get to be the lead PM on PetVille, and now you have the success factory. Like everyone gets a chance to level up. In terms of company cultures, so there's kind of 4 culture types in companies. They've been studying culture for like 30 years. And there are things that people think are culture, like having a happy hour. That's not culture. That's having a happy hour. That's nice. But culture is about recognition systems. It's about what you have on the wall, how you walk and talk, and what specific outcomes it drives in your business. So the 4 types, I hope I remember them all. It's embarrassing if I don't because I'm being recorded. But the 4 types of company cultures, there's a hierarchical culture, which is commonly found in companies where the margin really matters, and there's kind of the management's job is to figure out the right way to do things and to make sure that people adhere to that way of doing things so that you don't have like safety errors and things like that. And by the way, for all these culture types, there have been companies that have been hugely successful and also failed. So there's not like a right culture type. Hierarchical companies often get disrupted. So like if you're Schick or Bic or you're making pens or razor blades and then the Dollar Shave Club guys come along with subscription box. You might make razors that are better than their razors and cheaper, but they came up with this new kind of other way of getting customers. So they get disrupted by these other culture types. Another culture type would be a market-driven culture. On hierarchical, those employees are not necessarily the most creative, out-of-the-box thinkers, right? Because they're about adherence. A marketing culture is usually about stealing market share from somebody else or landing into a customer and then selling them other stuff. So like I mentioned the Dollar Shave Club guys. They're all about stealing market share, right? And growing their number of subscribers and retaining them, right? And Salesforce is the greatest land and expand company we've seen in 100 years. Maybe the product could use some work. The problem that market-driven companies face is that they're only selling exactly what they need to in that moment. And that's why with a company like Salesforce, you can say, how the hell did they not come up with the cloud? They invented the cloud. They disrupted Oracle with the cloud, and they had all these customers who would have much rather paid them than Amazon, who sells books and soap and chips and stuff, right? But Amazon came up with it because Amazon, incredibly, is hierarchical, and they're also moonshot. They're the big idea company. And normally the big idea company can't execute on delivering things in an hour. Like they're 2 completely different culture types. And companies often struggle because they're dominant in one culture type and they have another culture type that's holding them back. So Amazon is really good at both. Salesforce, not so great. Typically the disruptive companies, the moonshot companies, have a real tough time with budgets and deadlines, right? They're sloppy on process. They don't have time for that. teams have trouble focusing because they get bored and they want to move on to the next thing, right? The last culture type, which is very common in Europe actually, is called a clan culture. Clan culture is a small team that's like a family, and they love their product, and it's like everyone loves it, and they build beautiful things. Unfortunately, clan companies can struggle because they can't hire more people in from the outside and grow. They have a tough time expanding into other product lines because they can't maintain that same level of care and DNA. And worst of all, they can't get rid of underperformers because you're basically like firing your brother, right? So those are the 4 culture types. And as leaders in your startups, you can, all of you are probably going, oh yeah, crap, I know which one I am, right? Great. Once you know, then in your hiring, you can look to round out things. So like if you're in this disruptive kind of company and you're going after some big crazy moonshot and you're not hitting your milestones on your product roadmap, where we're building everything to move a metric, right? Then you bring in somebody who makes the trains run on time, who will not go to sleep until all of those bugs are filed just so, who documents things for your customers so they can integrate your product, who polishes the API so that people can actually use this thing. So if you're aware of what your cultural bucket is, then you can catch yourself, because we all have biases. So like if somebody comes in and they're interviewing with you and they're just, you're an idea person and you're just like bouncing ideas like crazy, and this person's bouncing ideas back, they're not gonna love filing bugs. Like they wanna run product, they wanna be you. You already have you. Like we don't need more ideas, we have enough ideas. We need the person who is like, okay, let's figure out how we're gonna get this done, right? So knowing like which culture bucket you're in and like adapting is really important. So we got about 9 more minutes.
You raise your hand first.
Thanks, very interesting talk. I have 2 questions actually. One is, you said you did a lot of games like Will That, Will This, and so on in a pretty short time. Like how did you actually do it? Did you have so many people, or did you have like a very smart way of doing it? And the second question actually is the culture part. How did it actually evolve at Zynga, like from the beginning till the end? Like how much did it change?
Those are 2 good questions. Okay, so the first one was, I would say in the beginning we ran small teams, and they worked unreasonably hard, and the games were basically forks of the same code. So like the Mafia Wars code would go into a repository so that you would then, if you're building Dope Wars, then you would just take a fork of that code and you would go and crank on that. And then if somebody wrote something good for Mafia Wars, you might try and port it over. There was never a like successful effort to really document the repository and make it as useful as possible. Stuff never really works, but we thought it would. In the end, we got way too big. We bought teams and we grew to over 3,000 people. And you look at companies like Supercell that'll build, Clash of Clans with, they say 40 or 50 people, but with contractors and stuff. Let's say it's 100 people that does $1 billion a year. Like Zynga's got, around 1,500 people now, and they'll do, 750 million. It's not so great. So I think we grew too big and we lost sight of, how to do things small. The second question, I would say, we screwed up our recognition systems. In the beginning, our culture was a vibrant culture where you were just so addicted to being there. You didn't want to go on vacation because you were afraid you were going to miss one of those product review meetings and you were going to miss something. And we did quarterly reviews of employees, and we would measure them on 2 kind of vectors. We would manage performance and potential. And if somebody took on a new responsibility or got promoted, then we called it a level up. And we called out everyone who leveled up, every promotion, quarterly. We had awards for everything. I mean, it was like Little League. Like you could be on the last place team, you're going to get a trophy. And it was so out of control. It got to the point where you'd say, well, wait, we have to give an award. We got to give an award to the QA team. The QA team, we got to give them something. You know, and it stopped being this beautiful meritocracy. You know, it became about politics and avoiding hurting anyone's feelings. Oh, well, this is new game. It hasn't launched yet, so we're not going to give them anything. We need to not give them anything because they're not making any money yet. Yeah, that makes sense. Then suddenly the new game people feel like it sucks to work here. Oh, we got to give them awards then, but what are we going to give them awards for? And so it was just got nuts. And in the early days, the best example I can tell you, the kind of biggest award you could win in the company was the Zyngas Spirit Award, which meant you encompassed all of the company's values, right? And in the beginning, this award was $10,000 worth of stock that vested over 4 years. Not bad. Like, hey, that's great. I mean, I am paid to do a good job anyway, so giving me like $10,000, like cool, you know, and the stock will go up and that, yay, right? It became $100,000 invested stock. And here's what happens when you give someone $100,000 invested stock for doing a good job. The next quarter, they do a good job, and they're like, I did a good job again. You're like, well, I guess I don't need to work this hard anymore because there's not $100,000 more coming because we never gave this award to the same person twice, right? And so it got out of control, you know. Recognition's different in Europe than in the U.S. In the U.S., none of us got enough attention from our parents, and so we like that kind of attention is really popular in the U.S. I know in Europe, people don't like to be the tall grass sometimes. Could be team recognition, whatever, but experiences are way better than cash. And I mean, I did another startup when I was at eMusic, and we didn't have any money for these kinds of things. I had a top hat, and if somebody was like kind of the person of the month or whatever, I'd be like, you know what, the top hat's going to you, Jennifer. And Jennifer would put the top hat on her desk and be very proud. And it's about that. Like that's what it is. It's not about the money. You know, it could be a gift card for coffee. It could be it could be anything. But to make it this weird, like we had this like wheel you would spin and you might win. and it was like, it got insane. And so then people had this attitude of entitlement, you know, hey, I really think I ought to get an award this quarter because I did X, Y, and Z. You know, and I don't get an award this quarter, I might have to quit. And you're like, well, quit then, bastard, you know? But we did that, you know, like we weren't smart about our recognition systems. More questions? I think that it's hard to make a connected device that doesn't end up in my drawer or in landfill. And so I'm waiting for the stuff where I can't imagine my life without it. And I haven't found it, or when I find it, then they like integrate it in the phone. So like the other night at Bergheim, I danced for 12 miles or something. That's true, I can show you. But I would have worn that around my wrist, and Apple's like, oh, okay, we'll just add that to the phone. So I think it's tough. I can tell you guys, I think that AR should be a bigger deal than it is. I don't get it. I can understand why VR is not yet that big a deal because we're all addicted to our phones now, and the idea that I'm going to put this thing on, I'm going to be so immersed that I'm going to ignore text messages and push notifs and all this other stuff. It's hard for that to become a mass market experience, but eventually maybe it will. I mean, games are actually really high quality, like on, you know, the consoles are making really beautiful games before VR, and now they're just like nuts. You know, I mean, I don't know. So I think that it'll come. It's just taking longer than people thought. I think the only game I can think of that could possibly post the kind of numbers that Pokemon did would be if someone made an AR version of Harry Potter, because that would have trading and, you know, you've got this ingredient that I need for my magic spell, and so it could be very social. But wait, that reminds me of something we were just talking about. We went in the cafe downstairs. We're talking about when you release something now, this is a hard environment to put something out into the world because there are a million new apps and websites and games, literally like a million every year. And you're competing for space on people's phone and in their mind and everything. And so it feels like, and in the reality is, that when you release something new right now, it's like you're putting a grain of sand on a beach and you're hoping that millions of people find it, right? So from when you launch, try and figure out how you're not a grain of sand, how you're actually like, at least you're a sand castle that's like kind of tall and far enough back from the water when you launch so that people have a reason to go back, and simple things, take LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn, every bit of marketing they do is something that they've learned from dating apps. Like LinkedIn will send me an email. I mean, the last thing I want is a real job. LinkedIn will send me an email that says, 7 people have looked at your profile. Don't you want to see who? Creepy. It's like straight up like Match.com, like 1998 marketing, right? And that's how they get me to go back. I'm like, I don't care. I don't know. All right, who's looking? Who's looking at me? But that's their way, okay? And so, if you build a grain of sand, no one will find it. If they find it once, they won't find it again. If you don't delight them in that first session, then they're gone, okay? So don't do that. You've got to have something in that first experience that's worth coming back for. Some FOMO, something social. Even if remember how well the spinning wheel stuff did? Every single game, you spin a wheel. It's like fish game and there's a wheel. Like, why is there a spinning wheel? Why is there a slot machine? It doesn't make any sense, but it works every time in every game. Like something that makes me come back and be excited to see what's next, okay? If you're lucky, very few companies achieve it. So there's this tiny speck of sand, which everyone achieves. Then there's the sandcastle, which you build it, and then it's got enough that you can grow your audience and you have time to add new stuff. And if you're lucky, you can turn that sandcastle into a pier. Do you guys call that a pier here? Like a thing that juts out that boats can park next to. They have restaurants on them. They put roller coasters on them in California. If you can build a pier, piers are made of concrete. They last forever. Even when they're not in use anymore, they're still on the beach, right? Facebook is a pier, okay? When they're seeing their numbers lag, they're like, okay, instead of just thumbs up, let's have thumbs down. Let's have sad face, right? Let's have other emoticons. Let me make it so I can see what music my friends are listening to, right? Like they can add new stuff to goose the numbers and change the experience. Same with Instagram, Snapchat with the filters, right? Like these are things that get people to come back. These are the things that make it sticky. So make sure you launch for that.
I have the mic.
You win.
Hey, Marcus, first of all, thanks a lot. I think you're awesome. That was really great and helpful. One practical question from myself. I would like to know your opinion. Let's imagine I'm that captain. I want to build that ship. So the current is right. The season is right. I really want that ship built and try it out. But I can find that goddamn Bjorn. So that Bjorn is either not a good fit for me or just can't build it. What if I hire some freelance Bjorns who are gonna build me the prototype, I'll launch it, I check it out, and then I maybe am lucky enough to find a Bjorn. What do you think about that approach?
So if you have in your professional life had the experience of managing outsourcers, then you might be okay. If you have never done it before, then you're gonna die. I mean, that's what also the other side of the Vasa, like those guys all sunk. Back then, you go out on a pirate raid, and if you found treasure, then everyone got some money. But if you didn't, then everyone would starve or come back with scurvy or whatever. A lot of app developers, a lot of job shops make a lot of money from people who have an idea for something that they spec out poorly, and then they build exactly what you wrote in your badly written spec. And you're like, well, wait, why doesn't it have a tab for this? Or why doesn't it have this functionality? And they're like, well, you didn't ask for it. You're like, well, I need it. They go, great, 20 grand. And 2 months. Right? And so that's reality. So if you don't have that Bjorn, then you need to bring that project manager in who's done it before, but don't try and do it on your own. I mean, you can. A lot of people don't listen to advice. But
All right.
If I was to tell you I was building a company and I was modeling a lot of it culturally off of Zynga, what is the one thing you would tell me absolutely to not do?
Don't let dogs in the office. We had this dog-friendly policy in the office, and a woman got bit in the face, and they're still paying her. It's been like 3 years. It like broke a nerve in her face, and it's sad. And the dog thing was really a distraction. I mean, look, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and I wish I could prevent every mistake that you could possibly make. I couldn't. What I would rather than tell you what not to do, I will tell you what I think was so beautiful about the Zynga experience that really made it. I mean, you were there. It was such a dynamic environment, which is if you learn something at Zynga, you couldn't wait to teach it to somebody else. Like learn, teach, brown bags. Like, what am I doing? Why is it important? You know? And they used to have these PM meetings, and the culture of the product managers at Zynga was so strong. They would get together once a week, and they would say, hey, here's what I built, and here's what happened. Good or bad. Okay? And that was beautiful because everyone was learning from each other and cross-pollination of ideas, and it was a really cool environment to work in. The other thing I can give you guys, I'll send it to the family and you can send it out to whoever uses it, is it's really important actually to have a job architecture. Can't believe I forgot about this. So what an engineer is called at Google and what an engineer is called at Facebook and what an engineer is called in your shop are all wildly different. And so if you have somebody interviewing for talent and you are not in agreement with that person about what the word principal software engineer means, then you'll have two different interviews happening. Right? And so I'll send you a job architecture that you can use, have everyone on the team that's interviewing use the same language. Okay? When you interview an engineer, see if they meet, like if you're looking for something that's super senior, say it's principal, and you interview them, you're like, maybe not a principal, maybe senior level 3. And you go, well, we really like that person, like let's bring him in as a senior level 3. Right? But you can't let good people go. And you can't have this like dissonance in these meetings, in these interviews, because it's too much of a waste of time. And if you have a plan that relies on you hiring 3 principal software engineers in a quarter to get something done, then you have a bad plan. Like your plan needs to be tied to what you can actually get done in recruiting. Like have honesty in your plan.
Just a quick question. Did you also have hackathons at Zynga?
Yeah, we did, but we didn't have very good hackathons. So what other companies do with a hackathon is they let people come in and work on kind of whatever they want for a few days, and then it's like, let's see what you got. And we did this thing where we would say, okay, we're having a hackathon, and it needs to be about this. And that was kind of not really inspiring. You're like, oh, okay, so you basically want me to work all weekend for free. I don't work hard enough as it is. And so I feel like a good hackathon, there's a lot of blogs about how to do it right.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, was there jam spirit in 1 week? 5 pieces of content new in the game. So the whole quantity actually works, but the quality suffers. That's what I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what ends up happening is on something like a Zynga game scale, you might have a pod that's going after retention features, and you might have another pod that's around social. You might have another pod that's on the FTUI, the first time user experience, like the onboarding. And so you might have 3 pods, and they just go, "Wah!" and they get all the ideas out. And then they go to the community and they ask the players, like, what do you think of these ideas? And they see where the heat is, and then they would go. And that was kind of how they did it. And one thing that Zynga got right is they always listened to the fans. And so much of what happened with those games came from what the fans did. Like, Mafia Wars did not have a program for guilds. They didn't build features for guilds. People set that up on their own. Like, it was incredible. And they would have these like crazy wars. And the wars that play out in the real world would play out in Mafia Wars. Like there's like a guild of Palestinians and a guild of Israelis, and they just like have a war in Mafia wars. And they all organized that, and they showed us what the roadmap should be for those features. So we always listen to them. At one point, the FarmVille fans set up FarmVille Day worldwide. They self-organized in 80 countries to play in a single day, and we didn't do anything. It's like you can't make magic like that. Like you can't just will it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Marcus, for the insights.
Good life,